This video I want to show you one crafting method that I strongly believe every single player should know about, no matter if you're a new player or a veteran. It can be used to make early game 3 mod items all the way up to very end game 6 mod items worth tens of divines. The core principle behind this craft is very easy to understand, and with some slight changes to the crafting method, it can be applied to almost every item slot for the vast majority of builds. A bit later in the video I will showcase different crafts, where I use the same method to craft the same item, starting from an early 3 mod item all the way up to an endgame 6 mod item. As a quick heads up, in this guide I will not go over the ship crafting with the Curse of the Allflame mechanic, as we don't know yet if the mechanic will go core or not, and I want this guide to remain useful for every league. The core behind this crafting method is to use a crafting method of your choice that forces one mod onto the item, like essences, rerolling it until you roll another desired mod, and then using the crafting bench to add another mod. For higher budget crafts, we will use a fractured base and metamods to get even more desired mods, but more on this later. Before I go into the specific example crafts, I first want to explain some basics about crafting for people who might be newer to crafting in Path of Exile 1. Things like how reforging items work, what a fractured item is, utilizing resistance swaps, explaining metamods and why they are useful for crafting, why you should focus on either prefixes or suffixes first, and I will also go over why I can highly recommend people to use Path of Exile. If you are more experienced and already know all of this, you can simply use timestamps to skip this part. Reforging. In easy terms, this is what a Chaos Orb does. It rerolls all of these stats on an item and gives you random new ones. An item can have up to 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes, for a total of 6 mods. There are multiple mechanics that use this same system, but has slight differences to make it more deterministic. First we have essences. These also reroll the item but guarantee one specific modifier on every reroll, depending on the essence you use. If we look at Deafening Essence of Envy for example, using this on an armor piece will guarantee 31 to 35 chaos resistance on every reforge. Second we have Harvest. This reforges the item but guarantees one mod with a specific tag. More on this later in the Path of Exile section, but for now as an example, Fire Resistance would have the fire tag. So Harvest Reforge Fire would have a chance to roll fire resistance more frequently on the item. Third is Fossils. Again, there are more specifics later in the Path of Exile section. Fossils can be used to either increase the chance of a specific tagged mod to appear more frequently, or prevent certain tagged mods from appearing at all, thus increasing the chance for specific mods to appear on the item for every reforge. If you, for example, make it more likely to roll fire modifiers, and prevent attribute modifiers from appearing, this would drastically increase the chance for fire resistance to appear on the item. Here is where fractured items come into play. A fractured item locks one specific mod onto the item. Outside of a few very rare cases, no matter what you do with this item, that one specific modifier will stay on the item, no matter if you scour it, use a Chaos Orb, or use any of the above mentioned crafting methods. This is great because between the Essence and the Fractured mod we already have 2 guaranteed mods on the item we want to make. We also have some options here depending on the budget of the craft and the strategy we want to use. We can, for example, either buy any useful mod as a fracture, just to have one more mod on the item, buy a fracture of a mod that is generally more rare or harder to hit in order to save currency trying to reroll into this mod, or buy a fracture that makes it easier to do the proper crafting steps to get the 5th or 6th mod. You can see more of this later in the examples. Next up is resistance swaps. We can use the Harvest crafting bench to change one resistance to another one of the same tier. This can come in very handy. Most of the crafting examples later on will focus on Righteous Fire gear, since that's a very popular build, especially for newer or more casual players. On Righteous Fire items we usually want Chaos Resistance and Fire Resistance, because Chieftain specifically scales with having tons of fire resistance. This means that if you use the Envy Essence mentioned earlier, you don't have to reforge the item until you hit high fire resistance roll. Even if you hit a cold or lightning resistance roll, you can simply reforge it into fire resistance, making it much cheaper and faster to hit a good item. Prefix or suffix first. This is a concept that you won't encounter much in low budget crafts, but the vast majority of mid to endgame crafts use this principle. There is a way to protect certain mods when further crafting your item. Imagine a sort of checkpoint for your craft. In a lot of cases, if you focus on crafting either your 3 prefixes or 3 suffixes first, you can lock them in and protect them during further crafting steps, allowing you to focus on the other 3 afterwards without needing to hit those first 3 again. Now how do we protect those mods? The 2 things mainly responsible for this are Eldritch currency if the item allows it, or metamods. If we are crafting a non-influenced piece of armor, we can make use of Eldritch currencies to protect certain mods. We can use Embers or Ichors to make either the Exarch or the Ether dominant, and then, for example, use an Eldritch Orb of Annulment, which will then only remove prefixes or suffixes respectively. So if we have finished crafting our 3 suffixes first and then make the exact dominant, the Eldritch annulment is only ever able to remove a prefix, so our 3 suffixes are safe. Being dominant just means that the Eldritch implicit you add with the Ember or Ichor is of a higher tier than the other one. So if you don't have any implicits yet, simply adding a lesser Eldritch Ember will make the exact dominant. If you already have a lesser Eldritch Ichor applied, you then need to apply a greater Eldritch Ember to make the exact dominant again. The second way to protect your mods is by using metamods. Metamods are crafts on the crafting bench, which don't add normal mods to the item, but rather add mods that influence further crafting steps. There are 5 metamods that I would categorize into 3 different categories. First is can have up to 3 crafted modifiers or multimod. The craft itself uses up 1 modifier slot, which means you can add 2 crafted mods with the bench instead of 1. This means the final item has 1 less mod, so we can only ever have a 5 mod item, and crafted modifiers are usually lower than the highest normal counterpart. This can still be great to either simply guarantee 2 good mods for your build, even if the number might be a bit lower, or because it might be a lot cheaper than trying to hit the same mods at a higher tier by continuing the craft. There are also mods you can add with the crafting bench that can be quite strong, and they can't naturally appear as normal mods. Second is cannot roll attack or caster modifiers. This means further crafting steps cannot interact at all with modifiers that have a caster or attack tag. As an example, cast speed has the caster tag. If you use the cannot roll caster meta mod on the item and then use an exalted orb, it would be impossible to add cast speed to our item, as every mod with a caster tag cannot appear. On the other hand, if you already have cast speed on your item and use cannot roll caster, an orb of annulment would never be able to remove cast speed, since it's protected by the meta mod. This can come in quite handy in situations where you have a great mod you want to keep, but you also rolled a very useless mod next to it. If the useless mod does not have the same tag, you can use the cannot roll meta mod to safely remove that mod. Third, prefix or suffix cannot be changed, also called prefix or suffix lock. These work very similarly to cannot roll caster or tag mods, but it does not matter which tags your mods have. It counts all prefixes or suffixes respectively. This is the meta mod you use by far the most, and it's the reason you usually try to craft either your prefixes or your suffixes first. Lastly, I want to quickly go over Path of Exile. I won't go into detail here since it can be a lot, but even at a basic level I would highly recommend people to use it frequently. On a higher level, it can be used to simulate crafts and basically map out your craft before you do it in-game. What we use it for in this video is to see the tags of mods on a certain item and what the weighting is. Let's use Regis Fire Boots as an example, since we will be crafting those in the example clips. We can simply go to Boots and select Strength Boots, since that will be a pure armor base that we will use. Here we can see quite a bit of information. We can see every single mod that can appear on that item, whether it's a prefix or a suffix, how many tiers that specific mod has, what the item level requirement is, which is also quite important, and what the weighting of the specific mod is. If we click on movement speed, for example, we can see that it has 6 tiers. If you want to be able to roll a 35% movement speed, or tier 1, the item level of the base needs to be item level 86. If 30% movement speed is enough, it can be as low as item level 55. We also see that the weighting of each tier of movement speed is the same at 1000. The total weighting of the prefixes in this example is 39,000. So if you roll a prefix on an item level 86 boot base, you have a 1000 out of 39,000 chance, or 2.5% chance, that there will be a tier 1 movement speed roll. This weighting is really important. Remember earlier when I said that some crafting methods can be used to force mods that are usually rarer? In our Righteous Fire Boots example, we want both fire and chaos resistance. If we look at the weightings here, we can see that a tier 1 fire resistance roll has a weighting of 1000, or 1.7% chance. Remember that we can also use cold or lightning resistance with the harvest resistance swap trick I mentioned earlier. Tier 1 chaos resistance, however, only has a weighting of 250, or 0.4% chance of appearing. We can see that a tier 1 chaos resistance roll is 31 to 35%. This is the same as the Essence of Envy shown earlier. So we can use this to force the mod that is the hardest to hit. I can actually use this side itself to show you just how much currency you can save by using guaranteed methods to force the harder mod onto the item. Path of Exile can simulate how many rolls on average it would take to hit certain outcome. Let me show you. Over here we can select Essence Crafting, and for this example we use Anger Essence to force fire resistance on the item. We can then left click on any mod to tell the site that we want to hit this specific mod. So let's select Tier 1 Chaos Resistance. Here we can see that on average it would take us 117 Anger Essences, or 117 Reforges, until we hit Tier 1 Chaos Resistance next to it. Now let's do the opposite. Let's select the Envy Essence over here. Now we can actually select Tier 1 Fire, Cold and Lightning Resistance, as we can make use of any of these and simply resistance swap them to Fire. If we put them in the same group here, it tells the site that it's fine if we hit any of these three. And now you can see that it suddenly only costs 12 essences on average to hit Tier 1 of any resistance that we can swap to Fire. This means that using a Chaos Resistance essence to hit the Elemental Resistance uses around 10 times less essences than doing it the other way around. Now let's come back to the mod tags I mentioned earlier. If we look at the movement speed mod, we can see the green speed tag below it. This means that movement speed has the speed tag and only the speed tag. If we look at the armor and life hybrid mod, it has both life and defense tags. Any crafting method that interacts with a specific tag can interact with any mod that shares the same tag on that item. So in this example, if we reforge speed with the harvest bench, it would always guarantee movement speed on the item. And since all 6 tiers have the same weighting, we are equally as likely to hit 10% movement speed as we are to hit 35% movement speed. The same goes for Chaos Resistance. It's the only Chaos tag mod, so Reforged Chaos would always guarantee Chaos Resistance. If we look at life now, we have Hybrid Armor and Life, Flat Life, Percent Life Region, and Flat Life Region that share the life tag. This means Reforged Life is able to pick any of these mods. Generally speaking, using this Reforge method is much better if you can force one mod because it's the only one of the tag, like Movement Speed or Chaos Resistance in this example. Let's start with the crafting examples now. First, we need to know which mods we would like on our item in order to decide which item level the base should have. We can just use Path of Exile for this. The mods we would like on our item might be higher armor rolls, movement speed, life, life region, chaos res, or elemental res. Tier 1 movement speed is the only mod with a requirement of item level 86. The second highest is life region at 85. So ideally, we would want to buy an item level 86 base for the chance to roll the highest tier of movement speed. The thing is, especially with fractured mods, having certain fractures at a higher item level can exponentially increase the cost of the base. So depending on your budget or what you want out of your craft, you might need to lower the item level for it. In order to know which base item you should buy, you can just Google PoE boots in our example and select the wiki link. Here we can select armor, as that is the defensive layer of our build, but you can simply click on any base that your build personally prefers, be it armor, energy shield or any hybrid combination. Now we can see every armor boot base in the game, and by simply sorting by armor, we can see what the highest armor base in the game is. In this case, it's Leviathan boots with a level requirement of 84. Right now, if we look at the Leviathan boots with a tier 1 life fracture, for example, the difference between item level 85 and 86 is only 1 diff. So here you might as well buy the item level 86 version. One thing to note is that the better the base type of the item is, the more expensive the fractures usually are. Compare Leviathan boots to Titan boots, for example, which are the third best armor base. Instead of 8 diff, these are only 3 diff. So you save 5 diff by having around 120 less base armor. If you plan to specifically roll for defensive mods, for example with energy shield gear, the difference in base stats can quickly add up, and you can lose 30 to 50% of your energy shield by only buying the 3rd or 4th best base. If you don't plan to specifically roll for defensive stats on the item and just use the base for some free defenses, it's much easier to justify using a worse base if that means saving a lot of currency. Now let's finally start actually crafting some items using the things we just talked about. I've prepared some different bases here. The main part will be crafting Righteous Fire type boots that I personally use in my Fulcrum Chieftain build. I will craft different pairs, ranging from 3 mod early game items to 6 mod endgame items worth quite a bit. I also prepared 2 bow bases and a ring base to show that this works for other crafts as well, and that you can do it without essences. Now I have 2 normal pairs without fracture, 1 movement speed fracture, 1 region fracture, and 1 life fracture for the endgame version. As shown earlier, this is the pair we are trying to craft. For now, let's start with the normal pairs and buy some essences.
I should raise my fees.
Now for the early game items, it's as easy as just throwing a few essences onto the item and seeing what we get. This was quite lucky and not the norm, but we already see we have movement speed, we have chaos res, we have a high life roll and armor roll. So this is already a really good pair of boots that we can just use. But let's do a few more. In this example, we got a decent life roll and a high armor roll. So we could just craft fire resistance. And we already have a decent pair. Here we got fire resistance, so we can just craft movement speed. And it's already usable. Same with this one. Same with this one, we could just craft movement speed. Same with this one. Now we already got life region, so if we craft movement speed now, we have a 4 mod item already. And this is looking quite good. If we price check this pair, it's already worth 1 divine as it is. Now let's go on to the next place. Now we have a movement speed fracture. Since every build kinda wants movement speed, this guarantees that we have the most important stat. Now this is already really good. We have movement speed, we have the fire resistance, we have a good life roll. So we can just craft, for example, armor. And it's already a really good pair. This as is already 6 or 7 divine. As you can see, this is already a 5 mod item now, as the life region is quite low. But that's what's nice about it. As you are just reforging the item, you can just hit more than just 1 extra mod. Now let's try something different. We now incorporate one of the suffixes first method I mentioned earlier. Now we start with a life region fracture, since this is a really good mod for us. And we spam the envy essence until we hit another high resistance. This is so we have our 3 suffixes done first, and we can then move on to the prefixes. That was pretty quick and lucky already. Now, with this, we already have a really high armor roll, so theoretically we could keep this and just curve movement speed, but I want to show you the right method when using the suffixes first method. So ideally, we want movement speed and life, and armor would be nice. What we can do is now use the suffix lock method. As our suffixes are done with the 3 mods we want, we could craft suffixes cannot be changed, and then continue with the next step. However, a really nice trick is, there are 5 metamods. The only prefix of this is suffix cannot be changed. So what we can do is, we go to the menagerie.
Until next time.
And use this craft. We can use a wild bristle matron, which is usually quite a bit cheaper than the metamod itself. At the point of recording this video, a wild bristle matron is only 95 chaos. So it's around half a divine instead of 2 divines. If we use this, it adds a meta modifier, and since our suffixes are full, the only prefix meta modifier there is suffix lock.
Prove to the Earth ones you are worthy exile. You are truly a survivor.
Now as we can see, instead of paying 2 divines, we only paid 95 chaos. What we could do now is, on the harvest bench, use reforge speed to guarantee a movement speed modifier. However, in this example, there's a better way. We can just go back to Faustus and buy a Veiled Chaos Orb. So we just bought a Veiled Chaos Orb. This reforges the item, randomizing every mod usually, and it adds a Veiled modifier. However, since we used suffix cannot be changed, this prevents the life region, fire res, and chaos res from changing. So it only reforges the increased armor, and thus always add a prefix. So we can use this now. As you can see, it adds a prefix. Now if we take a look at the Path of Exile again, under the wield modifier section, we can see that there are multiple movement speed modifier we can get. There's movement speed and onslaught, movement speed and more movement speed if you haven't been hit recently, and movement speed and chance to avoid being chilled. A little trick is we can go to the crafting bench and craft mana, since this prevents some outcomes from appearing when you unveiling the item, and this basically guarantees that we unveil a movement speed modifier. As we can see here, we got the movement speed and more movement speed if you haven't been hit recently. And now we can simply craft life, and we already have a really good 5 mod item. Now let's go to the final example. If we take a look at the boots we want again, for this example, we want fire and chaos res, a life regen rate, we want high life. This time we fracture it, because as you could just see with the other example, a crafted life mod is way lower than the tier 1 life mod. And as we could just see, the movement speed we can guarantee with the wield exalted orb. So we have, if we fracture life, we always have the mod open for chance to avoid being frozen. If you don't want the chance to avoid being frozen, you can just craft armor at the end. This, however, will get more expensive, because this means we need to spam the essence until we hit both the life region and a high resistance roll. So this can depend quite a bit on your budget. If you want to hit tier 1 life region and a tier 1 resistance, this can get quite expensive. So if your budget is a bit lower, you can just settle for some T2 rolls or something. Here, for example, if you are a bit lower on budget, you could already settle for this. You have a tier 1 fire resistance, which is quite good, but it's only a tier 5 life regen rate. For this video, I will keep going until I have a bit higher rolls, but on this I can already show you the Eldritch Annulment method to protect your mods that I explained earlier. So we can see we have 3 prefixes, so theoretically our mods are full. However, we can look at the Eldritch Annulment again. I don't have one, let me quickly buy one.
All in order. I'll let you know.
This says if the Searing Exile is dominant, it only removes the prefix. So we can quickly go to the currency, use a lesser Eldritch Ember to make the Searing Exile dominant. As you can see, the Searing Exile modifier is the only one it has. And if I now move the Annulment Orb, it can only remove the armor or the movement speed. This way, the item has space again to use another Wild Bristle Matron, to use the Suffix lock method, and then we can use another Wield Exalted Orb, Wield Chaos Orb, and do the same we did with the last boots. But I want to go for a bit higher modifiers. Now here we have a stun and block recovery, so in theory what we can try is annul off the block and try to exalt res on. As you can see, this worked. Tier 1 life region is quite hard to hit, so this is something you could settle for. Do not drag this video on for very long, I will just keep this and continue with this. Now we are back here. We bought another Wild Bristle Matron. We apply the metamod again. Now we have the suffix lock again.
There's a fair breeze on the wind today, wouldn't you say, Exile?
Use our new Wild Chaos Orb. We craft mana again to block some unveil outcomes. And there we go. This time we already got the right mod. If, for example, you want exactly these boots with the movement speed and avoid being chilled, this is a, I think, 33% chance to hit this specific mod. If you don't get this and get, for example, like last time, the double movement speed mod, what you can do, if you really want to be chill immune, you just repeat the step of right bristle mage training for the suffix lock and using a Wield Chaos Orb and blocking mana until you get this specific mod. And then we can go to the crafting bench. Craft cannot be frozen. And if we compare the boots now, these are of course higher because I got a better fracture and I spammed a bit more essences until I have a higher fair rest roll. But in theory, those are the exact same boots. Now for the next example. Let's say you want to craft an elemental bow. You can buy any essence that adds flat damage to your bow and continue spamming it a bit until you hit another high flat damage. This time, for example, it's a tier 4, so we can keep rolling a bit. That's a tier 2 fire roll, for example. Now, if it's just an early bow, you can just craft something like attack speed. And you already have a 950 DPS bow. This was quite nice and easy. Now let's try to get something a bit better. If you already buy one of the flat damage tiers that is fractured, you can just spam the second flat damage until you hit the third. So in this example, we got a fractured cold damage and we have a lightning damage essence. So we can just spam this until we get a pretty good fire roll. This is only tier 5, but theoretically we got crit multi, so what we can do is just craft attack speed again and call it a day. But I want to show you a bit better bow. For this, let me quickly buy some more essences.
All in order. I'll let you know.
So let's take this for example. It's a tier 1 fracture, the essence is already basically tier 1, and the fire damage is tier 3. So if we just, for example, craft attack speed, we can check what the DPS is now. And it's already a 1286 bow. But we can do a bit better here. So now we can do the exact same thing, but now we protect the prefixes. This time we have to pay the 2 divines, but we can craft prefix cannot be changed. Now whatever we do, our 3 flat damages are saved. Now I don't want to get into too much detail, but we can do a few things here. You can just use the Wield Chaos Orb again, or you can do a very high budget and use a Reforge method, and then later on use the Wield Exalted Orb. For this example, to keep it a bit shorter and cheaper for me, because I don't want this item, I just buy a Wield Chaos Orb. Let's just pay full price for this. Now we can reforge this. As you can see, the prefixes are protected. For weapons, we can just block damage per charge. This gives us a good chance to hit either crit or attack speed. Let's unveil this. And we got an attack speed mod. So we can just take this. Craft crit chance. And if we price check this bow now, it's a 1300 DPS bow, 1160 elemental DPS with 8% crit chance, and it's 10 divine. Crafting this was way cheaper than 10 divines.
Have a good one.
Now, as the last item to showcase, let's use this ring for example. It's just a good Righteous Fire ring with a lot of resistance, specifically Fire Res and Chaos Res, and some life. Here we can just buy the life fracture again. This time we don't use an essence, because the Envy essence, as you can see, for other jewelry is increased chaos damage and not chaos resistance. So if we use this, we cannot guarantee chaos res. But the only mod that can naturally appear is chaos resistance. So if you go to the Harvest bench and use Reforge Chaos, you can see that every Reforge guarantees a chaos res roll. This time, unfortunately, it's random which tier we get. So we need to a few more Reforges until we hit a decently high chaos resistance roll and another good resistance next to it. Here the chaos resistance is good, but the cold res is too low, so let's continue. Here, as we can see, the attributes, if you use attributes, are quite nice. We unfortunately got the all elemental resistances, which is quite a bit weaker than just getting fire res as a chieftain, but we can still manage this. Here you can just craft the last prefix for whatever mod you want.
Alright.
For Righteous Fire specifically, there are not too many good prefixes we can get. So in this example, you can just craft increased damage, for example, and call it a day. You can also slam for the last prefix, that's also an option. I won't do that just now. And there you have it. This works for so many other items. As a quick last example, this is a fairly typical Righteous Fire helmet. It works the exact same way. The socketed gems deal 30% more elemental damage as an essence modifier. You just continue to spam this until you hit burning damage. For lower budget, and for higher budget, you can just reforge it until you hit another good suffix as well, like the region that I got. And then what you can do is just suffix lock and scour the item, so you only have 3 suffixes. Then craft any item, for example mana, to block it, so it cannot appear. And then you exalt slam 2 times, and just try to hit concentrated effect and life, or whatever other stat. And for the third stat, I just crafted AoE gems. I hope this guide was helpful and that you can see how powerful this method is for a wide variety of different items, ranging from early 3 to 4 mod items all the way up to expensive 5 to 6 mod items worth a lot of divines. If you have any questions or if something was unclear, feel free to leave a comment. I will reply to every comment and do my best to answer your questions. If you enjoyed this video or want to see similar guides in the future, I would really appreciate if you could subscribe. Have a nice day.